What if the greatest threat to Allied victory in Europe wasn't Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht, but rather an American general whose ambitions burned so intensely that his own supreme commander lost sleep over his next move? In the spring of 1945, as Nazi Germany crumbled beneath the combined weight of Allied armies, General Dwight D. Eisenhower found himself in an extraordinary position that few historians discuss openly. While German resistance fractured across the Rhine and the Third Reich gasped its final breaths, Eisenhower's private correspondence and confidential meetings reveal a man consumed not by fear of a German counteroffensive, but by the unpredictable actions of Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., whose Third Army was slicing through Europe with such ferocity that it threatened to upset the delicate political balance Eisenhower had spent years constructing. The tension between these two men represented far more than a personality clash. It embodied the fundamental conflict between military brilliance and political necessity, between the purity of battlefield victory and the compromised reality of coalition warfare. This is the untold story of how America's most celebrated tank commander became the figure his own supreme commander feared most, and why Patton's relentless drive eastward created a crisis that echoed through the highest levels of Allied command, reaching Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and even Joseph Stalin himself. If you've ever wondered about the hidden tensions that shaped the final year of World War II in Europe, then subscribe to this channel right now because we're diving deep into the historical records that reveal the truth behind the headlines. Hit that like button to help others discover this story, share this video with anyone fascinated by the complexity of military leadership, and leave a comment telling us what aspect of the Eisenhower-Patton relationship surprises you most. The relationship between Eisenhower and Patton stretched back decades before their names became synonymous with Allied victory. They had first met at Camp Meade, Maryland, in 1919, two young officers experimenting with the new Fan-Tory tank warfare that had emerged from the trenches of World War I. Eisenhower, the careful planner from Abilene, Kansas, and Patton, the wealthy aristocratic Californian who claimed to remember past lives as ancient warriors, formed an unlikely friendship based on shared innovation and tactical insight. But even then, differences emerged that would define their wartime relationship 25 years later. Patton possessed an intuitive genius for mobile warfare, seeing battles as fluid, living things that demanded audacity and speed. Eisenhower, by contrast, developed into a master of organization, logistics, and the infinitely more complex art of managing Allied coalitions, where British field marshals, French generals, and American theater commanders all demanded their share of glory and resources. By the time Operation Overlord launched on June 6, 1944, these two men occupied vastly different positions in the Allied hierarchy, yet their fates remained inexorably linked. The first serious tremor in their relationship occurred not in Europe, but in Sicily during the summer of 1943. Patton, commanding the U.S. 7th Army, had become obsessed with beating British General Bernard Montgomery to the city of Messina, viewing the campaign as a personal race rather than a coordinated Allied operation. On August 3 and August 10, 1943, Patton visited evacuation hospitals where he encountered soldiers suffering from what was then called battle fatigue or shell shock, conditions we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder and combat exhaustion. In two separate incidents, Patton struck soldiers he believed were malingering, calling them cowards and threatening them with execution. When news of these slapping incidents reached Eisenhower's headquarters in Algiers, the Supreme Commander faced an agonizing decision that would establish the pattern for their future relationship. Eisenhower knew that Patton was arguably his most effective combat commander, a general whose very name struck fear into German commanders, and whose tactical brilliance had already proven decisive in North Africa and Sicily. But he also understood that in a democratic army fighting a war against tyranny, such behavior could not be publicly tolerated. Eisenhower's solution revealed his characteristic approach to managing Patton, one he would employ repeatedly over the next 2 years. Rather than relieve Patton of command, which would have satisfied public outrage but deprived the Allied cause of a weapon it could scarcely afford to lose, Eisenhower issued a private reprimand, ordered Patton to apologize to the soldiers and medical staff involved, and attempted to keep the incident quiet. This decision, while pragmatic, established a dangerous precedent whereby Patton learned that his military value gave him latitude to operate outside normal constraints, a lesson that would have profound consequences as Allied armies approached Germany's heartland. The slapping incidents eventually leaked to American journalists in November 1943, creating a firestorm that reached the halls of Congress and the front pages of American newspapers. Eisenhower absorbed tremendous political pressure to remove Patton from command, particularly from Secretary of War Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall, who understood the domestic political implications of appearing to protect a general who had struck enlisted men. Yet Eisenhower held firm, though at considerable cost to his own reputation and political capital. He needed Patton for the coming invasion of France, and he was willing to endure the criticism to keep his most aggressive commander available for the campaigns ahead. This crisis revealed something essential about Eisenhower's private fears regarding Patton. It wasn't simply that Patton might commit another public relations disaster, though that concern certainly existed. Rather, Eisenhower increasingly understood that Patton's inability to subordinate his personal glory to larger strategic objectives made him simultaneously invaluable and dangerous. Patton viewed war through the lens of classical military history, seeing himself as a modern incarnation of Alexander, Hannibal, or Napoleon. Eisenhower, by contrast, understood that World War II was fundamentally different from the conflicts Patton romanticized. This was a political war, where Allied unity mattered as much as battlefield victories, where post-war arrangements were being negotiated even as soldiers fought and died, and where the wrong victory in the wrong place at the wrong time could create diplomatic catastrophes that might outlast the war itself. By early 1944, as planning for Operation Overlord intensified, Eisenhower had come to a troubling realization that he shared only with his closest confidants. Managing George Patton would be nearly as challenging as defeating the Wehrmacht. Patton's role in the D-Day deception operation known as Fortitude demonstrated both his value and his volatility. The Allies created a fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, supposedly commanded by Patton and positioned in southeastern England, threatening the Pas-de-Calais region of France. German intelligence, convinced that Patton was America's finest general and would therefore lead the main invasion, kept substantial forces away from Normandy even after the June 6 landings, waiting for Patton's real invasion that would never come. The deception's success vindicated Eisenhower's decision to retain Patton despite the slapping scandal, as German commanders Gerd von Rundstedt and Erwin Rommel both cited their expectation of Patton's assault as a reason for withholding panzer reserves from the Normandy battlefield. But Patton chafed bitterly at being held in England while other commanders earned glory in France. When he finally arrived in Normandy on July 6, 1944, to take command of the Third Army, he was like a thoroughbred racehorse held too long at the starting gate, explosive with pent-up energy and determined to make up for lost time. The subsequent breakout from Normandy, Operation Cobra, unleashed Patton in a campaign of mobile warfare that showcased his unique talents. Between August 1st and August 31st, 1944, Patton's Third Army advanced over 400 miles, liberated countless French towns, destroyed or scattered numerous German divisions, and captured over 65,000 prisoners while sustaining relatively light casualties. Military historians still study this campaign as perhaps the finest example of armored exploitation in military history, a month when Patton transformed the grinding attrition of the Normandy hedgerows into a war of movement that the German army could not possibly win.